Hello. Welcome. Leave where you speak in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. And now let's get started. My name is Sofia Rodriguez. I'm 32. What happened in Alaska wasn't just another RV trip. It was the night everything changed. After years of teaching in bustling Los Angeles, I desperately needed solitude. The Denali wilderness seemed perfect, a place where I could park my rented RV beneath the northern lights and finally work on my novel. My brother Miguel called me reckless for going alone during the winter solstice, but I assured him the vehicle's heater and my cold weather gear would keep me safe. If only I'd researched the strange incidents reported around Raven's Pass more carefully, maybe then I would have recognized the warning signs before darkness fell. The Raven's Pass RV park looked nothing like the cheerful photos online. Sure, they were the promised mountain views and snow-covered pines, but something felt wrong about the emptiness. Only one other RV was visible, parked far in the distance, its windows blocked by heavy black curtains. The caretaker, who checked me in, kept glancing at the aurora overhead, hurriedly suggesting Site 7, the most remote spot. Best view of the lights, she'd muttered, her voice shaking. Just don't look directly at them after midnight. I should have wondered why she kept checking her watch, or why the other RV's occupants had hung dozens of raven's feathers from their antenna. The signs were obvious now. The way the northern lights pulsed in impossible colors, how my compass spun wildly the moment I passed the park entrance, though the GPS had worked perfectly until then. But I was too busy setting up my space heater and satellite dish to notice how the shadows cast by the aurora seemed to move against the light. As night deepened, the aurora intensified unnaturally, spiraling in patterns that hurt my eyes. The temperature inside the RV dropped rapidly despite the heater's roar. The digital thermometer flashed with sequences of numbers that looked more like coordinates than temperatures, while my satellite radio picked up frequencies that should have been impossible, broadcasting what sounded like ancient Inuit songs played backwards. That's when I saw them, dark shapes moving through the aurora, casting shadows upward instead of down. At first, I told myself it was just atmospheric distortion, though the lights had never moved like that in any video I'd watched. The shapes grew larger, descending like black snow, each flake leaving frozen patterns on my windows that looked like staring eyes. I sat paralyzed, watching as they multiplied, accompanied by sounds like ice cracking deep beneath the earth. Then every light in the RV died simultaneously, and in the bitter cold, I heard something that made my heart stop. 3 knocks that shook the whole vehicle, followed by my brother Miguel's voice saying with terrifying clarity, "Sofia, let me show you what the lights really are. Hermanita, they've been waiting so long." I knew Miguel was impossible. He was back in Los Angeles, probably still grading final exams, but the voice was flawless, down to the way he always called me Hermanita when he was worried. The knocking spread across the roof now, like footsteps in the snow, and I watched in horror as the frozen eye patterns began to blink in unison. My rational mind fought for explanations, weather phenomena, sleep deprivation, altitude sickness, but none could account for the impossible cold that now frosted my bones. The heater wheezed and died with a sound like laughter, and my phone displayed thousands of missed calls from numbers that were just strings of zeros. Outside, the aurora had turned a deep, bloody red, pulsing in rhythm with the blinking ice eyes on my windows. Through the growing frost, I noticed something even more disturbing: tracks in the snow, perfectly preserved despite the howling wind. They started at the tree line and circled my RV. But they weren't animal tracks or human footprints. They looked like fractals, each impression a perfect geometric pattern that seemed to extend infinitely inward when I stared at them too long. And they were multiplying, appearing in the fresh snow without anything visible making them. The temperature dropped lower than should be physically possible. My breath froze midair, forming crystals that sparkled with the same otherworldly light as the aurora. The radio cycled through frequencies randomly, catching fragments of conversations that seemed to be from different times, past, present, and horrifyingly, what sounded like future versions of myself screaming warnings I couldn't quite understand. I tried using my satellite phone to call for help, But instead of connecting to emergency services, it played a series of voicemails I'd never received. Each message was from someone who had disappeared from this same spot over the past 50 years, their voices overlapping into a chorus that chanted coordinates in perfect synchronization. The numbers matched the strange sequences flashing on my thermometer, creating a pattern that pointed to something vast and ancient sleeping beneath the frozen ground. The other RV's lights finally came on, revealing silhouettes that moved in ways that defied anatomy. Through their windows, I could see what looked like a tear in space itself, a void that pulsed with the same rhythm as the aurora above. That's when I realized the other RV wasn't really there. It was something else wearing the shape of an RV, like a skin it had stolen from our reality. The RV's metal frame groaned under the supernatural cold, and I heard the windows starting to crack. The emergency radio crackled to life on its own, broadcasting a series of numbers in my brother's voice. Coordinates, I realized, all pointing to locations where other travelers had vanished over the years. Each set of numbers matched the strange sequences my thermometer had shown earlier, and they were counting down to my exact location. I tried to start the engine, but the key wouldn't turn. The dashboard lit up with impossible readings, negative temperatures that shouldn't exist, altitudes that would place me in orbit, and a fuel gauge that spun backwards, numbers replaced by symbols that looked like the ones carved into ancient hunting charms. Through the windshield, I could see the other RV's lights had come on, revealing silhouettes of figures that moved in ways human bodies shouldn't. The northern lights began to descend like a curtain, surrounding my RV in ribbons of color that seemed solid enough to touch. Where they brushed against the windows, the ice eyes merged and transformed, forming faces I recognized from missing person reports I'd ignored while planning my trip. Their mouths moved in sync, whispering names of places that had never appeared on any map, growing louder until the windows vibrated with their voices. Every electronic device I owned activated simultaneously, screens displaying fragments of text messages, emails, and social media posts from people who had vanished here. The messages formed a pattern, a story written in pieces across 50 years of disappearances. It wasn't just random accidents or bad luck. Something had been luring people here, collecting them like specimens in some cosmic experiment. The aurora seemed to be seeping through the walls now, filling the RV with lights that moved with intelligent purpose. Each tendril of light carried whispers in languages that predated human civilization, telling stories about the things that lived in spaces between dimensions. The fractal patterns in the snow outside had completely surrounded the RV, forming a perfect circle that pulsed with energy. Through the kaleidoscope of light and ice, I saw something emerge from behind the other RV, a towering shape that seemed to be made from the aurora itself, its form constantly shifting between human, animal, and geometric patterns that hurt my mind to look at. It left no tracks in the snow as it moved toward me, but every step made the ice eyes blink faster and the voices grow more insistent. Then it spoke, not with Miguel's voice anymore, but with the voices of everyone who had ever vanished here, speaking in perfect unison. Time to join the lights. Sophia, they've kept your seat warm. The entity's movement shattered every law of physics I knew. One moment it was by the other RV, the next it was beside my window, its ever-changing form reflected infinitely in the ice eyes. The aurora seemed to pour from its core, painting impossible colors across the snow that my mind couldn't process without screaming. I slammed the RV into reverse, but the engine only produced sounds like distant, mocking laughter. I abandoned the driver's seat and scrambled to the back of the RV, searching desperately for anything that might help. The emergency flares ignited on their own, burning with that same impossible aurora light. Each flare carved symbols into the walls that matched the fractal tracks outside. Through the rear window, I saw more entities emerging from the lights, each one a twisted kaleidoscope of familiar faces and cosmic geometry. The temperature dropped so low that the metal walls began to sing, a high crystalline tone that resonated with the voices outside. My phone flooded with videos of the northern lights taken by previous victims, each one showing more details that human eyes were never meant to process. In the last video, I saw my own RV, filmed from outside, right now. Though no one was there to hold a camera, years of physics lessons crumbled as I watched space fold around my vehicle. The entities weren't moving toward me. They were moving the very fabric of reality, bringing every point in space to a single infinite moment. The coordinates that had flashed across my devices weren't locations. They were equations, calculating the exact point where our dimension intersected with theirs. The raven's feathers on the other RV's antenna suddenly made sense. They weren't decorations, but warnings. Ravens, the messengers between worlds in so many cultures, trying to mark the thin places where reality wore thin. The fractal patterns weren't tracks, but mathematical proofs written in a language older than time, explaining exactly how and why I had already become part of their collection. The thing that wasn't Miguel pressed against the roof, its aurora form flooding through every crack and seam. I spread across the ceiling in fractal patterns that spelled out coordinates in a mathematical language older than humanity. The other entities circled closer, herding me away from any possible escape. Then the roof began to peel open like a blooming flower made of frost and starlight. What happened next exists in my memory like fragments of a shattered mirror. I remember running, the snow beneath my feet glowing with coordinate patterns that matched the ones in my thermometer. The entities flowed around me like living aurora, singing equations that calculated the exact temperature at which human consciousness freezes. I made it halfway to the park entrance before the lights descended completely, transforming the world into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and non-Euclidean angles. The entities showed me their true form then, not creatures of light and ice, but windows into something far vaster. Through their shifting geometries, I saw other dimensions where physics worked differently, where time and space were more suggestions than laws. The marks they left on me aren't visible to doctors or cameras, but every compass spins wildly in my presence now, and electronic thermometers malfunction, displaying coordinates where other people have vanished. The other RV's occupants were never found. But sometimes my phone receives voicemails from their numbers, just strings of numbers that match the patterns I saw in the snow. What's worse is what I understand now. The northern lights aren't just atmospheric phenomena. They're thin points in reality's fabric, windows through which ancient things study our world. Every winter solstice, they collect new specimens, using our own devices, our own voices, our own loved ones against us. The missing people aren't dead. They're equations now. Values in a cosmic calculation I can almost understand when the temperature drops slow enough. My brother Miguel doesn't believe my story, but he's noticed how his classroom compass points to me instead of north, and how ice forms in impossible fractal patterns on his windows whenever I visit. Last week, I received a text from my own number, sent from a future timestamp that shouldn't exist. It contained a single video file, footage of myself. My name is Daniel Chen. I'm 25. What happened in Maine wasn't just another RV trip. It was the night everything changed. Working remotely as a sound engineer had its perks, but after 6 months of city noise, I needed somewhere quiet. Acadia National Park seemed ideal. Just me, my recording equipment, and my converted RV seeking the perfect natural soundscape. My sister Anna thought October was too late for camping, but I insisted my professional audio gear would catch any approaching storms. I never expected it would capture something else entirely. Pine Haven Campground appeared deserted except for a vintage Airstream gleaming at the far end. The ranger barely glanced up from an ancient radio that crackled with static, pointing me to Site 13 near the lake. Great acoustics there, she said, adjusting her hearing aid. But don't record after sunset. The frequencies, they attract things. Her voice trailed off into white noise from the radio. I should have noticed how no birds sang near my site, or how the Airstream's owner had lined their windows with copper mesh. The warnings were in the sound waves, how my equipment picked up infrasound readings that shouldn't exist in nature, the way my ultrasonic microphones detected patterns that match no known species. Instead, I focused on setting up my array of parabolic dishes, excited to capture the acoustic properties of the misty lake. The first recordings seemed perfect, gentle waves, rustling leaves, subtle wind patterns. But when I played them back through my professional headphones, I heard something else layered underneath. Voices having conversations that hadn't happened, footsteps walking impossible paths, and most disturbing, my own voice calling out from times I hadn't yet spoken. The timestamp data showed future dates. That's when my equipment started picking up the pattern. Every sound in a 5-mile radius, waves, wind, distant cars, was being subtly altered to create a massive acoustic algorithm. The lake's surface rippled in geometric sequences that matched my acoustic spectrograms. Then every speaker I owned activated at once, outputting a subsonic hum that made my bones resonate, and I heard something that stopped my heart. 3 distinct taps on my recording booth window, followed by my sister's voice through the headphones. "Danny, I found the most amazing sound. You have to hear this." Anna couldn't be here. She was in Seattle mixing her latest album. But the voice was perfect, down to the way she emphasized amazing like our father used to. The tapping continued in a precise rhythm that matched the lake's wave patterns, and I watched in horror as condensation formed on the glass in shapes that looked like waveforms. Trying to stay rational, I began analyzing the audio signals. The software showed impossible readings, frequencies beyond the range of my equipment, modulation patterns that created standing waves in the air itself. My recording arrays were picking up sounds from everywhere at once, as if space itself was becoming an echo chamber. The spectrograph displayed fractals that grew more complex with each iteration. The signals were multiplying across every frequency band, creating interference patterns that looked increasingly deliberate. Each new pattern contained fragments of conversations yet to happen, coordinates encoded in background noise, and worst of all, clips of my own voice discovering these exact patterns, recorded hours in the future. The timeline was folding in on itself through sound waves. The temperature fluctuated wildly as the air pressure shifted with each new frequency. My ears popped constantly as invisible standing waves formed geometric patterns in the fog. The Airstream's windows began to vibrate in resonance with a subsonic frequency that my equipment couldn't fully detect. But my body felt in waves of inexplicable dread. Every piece of audio equipment I owned was now picking up fragments of what seemed to be a massive transmission. Bits of sound from different times and places wove together into a tapestry of noise that almost made sense, like a language spoken through the manipulation of reality itself. The fog around my V began moving against the wind, forming shapes that matched my acoustic imaging displays. Through my headphones, I heard a conversation between myself and Anna that hadn't happened yet, discussing what we discovered in the lake. But Anna's voice kept shifting between frequencies that no human vocal cords could produce. That's when the pattern began manifesting visually, ripples in space-time spreading outward from the Airstream's antenna, bending light and sound into impossible geometries. The acoustic anomalies intensified as night fell. My directional microphones detected a massive sound wave building beneath the lake's surface. The spectrograph showed it matching precisely with the future recordings already in my system. Every speaker and microphone began oscillating in sync, creating a feedback loop that transcended time. Desperate to understand, I triangulated the sound sources using my array. The data showed everything emanating from and being drawn toward the Airstream, but the readings made no sense. The vintage trailer was somehow broadcasting and receiving across all frequencies simultaneously, including ones that shouldn't exist in our dimension of reality. The fog bank rolled in impossibly fast, carrying with it echoes of every sound ever made at Pine Haven. Through my headphones, I heard snippets of past campers' conversations, prehistoric creatures' calls, and most disturbingly, sounds from events that hadn't occurred yet. The pattern was weaving them all together into something vast and incomprehensible. My equipment began melting down, each piece overloading with data that rewrote its own programming. The speakers leaked a silver liquid that moved against gravity, forming symbols that matched the lake's wave patterns. Through the fog, I saw figures emerging from the Airstream that seemed to be constructed entirely of crystallized sound waves. A subsonic pulse shattered every piece of glass in my RV, but instead of falling, The shards hung suspended in the air, vibrating in harmony with the pattern. The airstream's entire surface now rippled like mercury, its true form emerging, not a camper at all, but a three-dimensional manifestation of that impossible acoustic algorithm. Then it began to sing. Reality distorted around me, the sound beings approached. They moved like visual echoes, each step creating ripples in space-time that my equipment interpreted as music from the future. I tried recording them, but the files kept changing, showing events that were still happening, had already happened, and would never happen, all at once. The lake's surface had become a massive speaker cone, vibrating with frequencies that were structured matter at the molecular level. My microphones caught whispers in a language that bypassed my ears entirely, speaking directly to the pattern recognition centers of my brain. Each word carried fragments of human consciousness encoded in pure sound. The very air seemed to crystallize, forming geometric patterns that conducted sound in ways that defied physics. Through my remaining equipment, I watched helplessly as the pattern used my own recorded voice to create a perfect acoustic replica of me, one that existed simultaneously across all possible frequency. Every electronic device began playing back recordings from different timelines, versions of me that had made different choices, found different patterns, reached different conclusions. The sound beings moved through these alternate realities like they were shifting radio stations, searching for something specific in the wavelengths of my existence. The airstream pulsed with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat exactly, creating a resonance that began pulling my consciousness apart across the frequency spectrum. The pattern wasn't just recording reality, it was redistributing it, breaking down the barriers between observer and observation, between signal and noise. What they took from me can't be measured by human instruments. Every sound I hear now contains layers of quantum information, timelines splintering and recombining in endless acoustic fractals. My sister Anna noticed it first, how recordings of my voice contain conversations from days in the future, how her studio equipment creates perfect predictions of songs not yet written. The pattern follows me in subtle ways. Electronic devices malfunction in my presence, their speakers picking up transmissions from other possibilities. Studio microphones capture voices speaking backwards through time when I'm near. Every recording I make contains fragments of that night, encrypted in frequencies that only quantum computers can analyze. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the sound beings in white noise, their geometries still, shifting through dimensions of pure frequency. The airstream appears in the background of random photos and videos, its mercury surface rippling with the possibilities of every sound that ever was or will be. Each time, it's broadcasting coordinates hidden in subsonic pulses. The changes go deeper than equipment malfunctions. I can hear the quantum probability waves in everyday sounds, the mathematical patterns underlying all of reality expressed in pure acoustics. The pattern is still out there, growing stronger, using human consciousness as both antenna and receiver for something vast and impossible to comprehend. Last week, I found a vinyl record in my collection that shouldn't exist, a pressing of my sister's next album that she hasn't recorded yet. The grooves contain waveforms that match exactly with the pattern's predictions. When played backwards at precisely 333 revolutions per minute, it reveals coordinates to every thin spot in reality where sound and space intersect. One of them is your location, right now. As you read this, listen closely. The pattern is already in your speakers, waiting to be heard. My name is Andressa Martinez. I'm 29. What happened in Arizona? In just another RV trip. It was the night everything changed. As an archaeological photographer, I thought I'd seen everything ancient ruins could offer. The recently discovered petroglyphs near Canyon Shadow V Park promised unique shots for my portfolio. My colleague Drive warned me about the site's unusual electromagnetic readings, but I dismissed his concerns. After all, what harm could prehistoric art do? The RV park was eerily empty except for an old Winnebago covered in strange symbols. The manager, an elderly Navajo woman, hesitated when assigning me spot 7. The ancient ones are restless lately, she whispered, pressing a stone amulet into my palm. Don't photograph the spiral patterns after sunset. Some things weren't meant to be captured. I should have noticed how my camera's autofocus kept drifting to empty spaces, or how the Winnebago's symbols seemed to rearrange when viewed through my lens. The signs were there, random photos appearing on my memory cards showing scenes I hadn't shot, how every compass pointed toward the cliff face instead of north. But I was too excited about the petroglyphs to question why my previous site photos showed shadowy figures that weren't there during shooting. As dusk approached, the petroglyphs began to emit a faint phosphorescence. My light readings made no sense. The glyphs were somehow absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Each spiral pattern pulsed in sequence, creating a visual rhythm that matched exactly with mysterious timestamps appearing in my photo metadata. Static filled every radio frequency. That's when my camera started taking pictures on its own, each image showing the same scene from impossible angles. The timestamps were from hours in the future. Through my viewfinder, I watched in horror as the petroglyph spirals began to rotate, carving new patterns into the rock face. Then every electronic device died simultaneously, and in the sudden darkness, I heard something that made my blood freeze. 3 flashes from the Winnebago's direction, followed by a voice just like Dr. Ways, Rachel, you need to see what the patterns really mean? Drive. Way's voice was impossible. He was back at the university analyzing core samples, but it was perfect, down to his slight accent. Through my lens, I watched as the Winnebago's symbols began to glow with the same phosphorescence as the petroglyphs, forming new patterns that seemed to move deeper into the rock face. My camera screen displayed impossible images, petroglyphs I hadn't photographed yet, artifacts that hadn't been excavated, and layers of rock that shouldn't be visible from the surface. The timestamps kept advancing, showing future dates in an ancient calendar system I'd never seen before. Each image contained shadows that moved independently of any light source. The temperature dropped as the petroglyphs' glow intensified. My equipment readings showed radiation levels fluctuating wildly, matching patterns found in ancient astronomical charts. Through my viewfinder, I could see layers of history overlapping, ghostly images of the site throughout millennia, all happening simultaneously. Advanced imaging analysis on my laptop revealed something terrifying. The spiral patterns weren't decorative. They were mathematical equations written in a visual language that predated human civilization. Each new photo my camera captured automatically added more variables to these equations, like the site itself was solving for something. Every photograph I'd taken since arriving began to change. The images shifted to show what was behind the rock face. Beneath the ground, between the layers of reality itself, the elderly manager's amulet grew hot in my pocket, vibrating in sync with the pulsing glyphs. That's when I understood. The petroglyphs weren't a message, they were a door. The rock face rippled like water as the equations reached some terrible solution. My photos rearranged themselves into a time-lapse sequence showing the door opening throughout history. Ancient peoples, lost expeditions, previous photographers, all becoming variables in its infinite calculation. Each disappearance added new symbols to the pattern. Desperate to understand, I connected my camera to the laptop, running every analysis tool I had. The results were impossible. The petroglyphs contained fractal patterns that extended inward forever, each layer revealing civilizations that existed before written history. The symbols on the Winnebago formed the exact same patterns, but backwards in time. The ground beneath my RV shifted as something massive realigned itself deep below. Seismic readings matched the rhythmic pulsing of the glyphs perfectly. Through my camera's night vision, I watched in horror as the Winnebago's metal skin became translucent, revealing layer upon layer of ancient machinery built into its structure. Every digital screen now showed the same image, a 3-dimensional map of tunnels honeycombing the earth, all converging on this location. The timestamps indicated these passages had existed for millions of years. My camera captured automatic images of previous investigators finding this same map, moments before they became part of the pattern themselves. Each new photograph contained more shadows, their shapes becoming clearer, figures that seemed assembled from angles that couldn't exist in our geometry. They moved between the images like they were walking through doorways, getting closer with each automated shutter click. The amulet burned brighter as they approached, its surface now covered in the same impossible equations. The petroglyph door swung open on angles that hurt my eyes to look at, revealing a space that extended inward and backward through time simultaneously. The shadows stepped out of my photographs, their forms constructed from living symbols that matched the ancient patterns. My camera recorded their emergence automatically, each image showing them exist in multiple times at once. I ran for my RV, but the equations had already infected its structure. The walls rippled with calculations, solving for variables in a mathematics of space and time that humanity wasn't meant to comprehend. Through my viewfinder, I watched the shadows divide and multiply, each one carrying a camera from a different era: digital, film, glass plate, cave painting tools. The Winnebago's true form emerged as its disguise dissolved, a construct of the same living symbols as the shadows, designed to watch and wait through centuries. Its photographs covered every period in human history, each one capturing the moment someone else discovered what lay behind the spiral door. The images formed a timeline of disappearances leading right to this moment. My own cameras turned against me, their automated shots creating a feedback loop of imagery that bent reality around me. Each flash revealed the shadows in new positions, moving through the angles between moments. The amulet's glow pulsed in warning, but its protection was failing against mathematics older than time itself. The pattern spread across every surface, converting matter into pure information. My photos showed the process from every possible angle, documenting my own transformation into a living calculation. The shadows surrounded me, their cameras recording my addition to their infinite archive. Then the spiral door began to pull everything inward, including light itself. Chapter 5. The price what they took from me exists now only in images, scattered across time and space. The university's computers crash when trying to open my fieldwork photos. Any camera pointed at me captures something slightly wrong. Angles that don't match, shadows that move between frames, timestamps that contradict causality itself. Dr. We found the first changed photograph in his ancient astronomy texts, an impossible image of me using my digital camera at a dig site 5,000 years ago. More keep appearing. Daguerreotypes from the 1850s, cave paintings from the Paleolithic, all showing the same scene of discovery and disappearance repeated endlessly through time. The amulet left marks that modern scanners can't classify. Under certain light, my skin shows traces of living symbols that match the petroglyphs. Electronic devices malfunction around me, their screens displaying fragments of images from other times, other discoveries, other doors. The shadows watch from every photograph, counting down to the next iteration. The Winnebago appears in the background of random images throughout history, its symbols rearranging to mark where the equations weaken reality. My name is Jackie Foster. I'm 36. What happened in Texas wasn't just another RV trip. It was the night everything changed. Ghost towns were my specialty. As a history blogger, I'd visited dozens, but Dust Valley promised something unique. A perfectly preserved mining town where all 157 residents vanished in 1887. The lone RV park on the outskirts seemed perfect for my week-long investigation. Looking back, I should have questioned why the online booking system only allowed stays of exactly 7 days. Rusty Gate RV Park had just one other resident, a chrome Airstream that reflected the desert sun at impossible angles. The manager, a gaunt man with milky eyes, insisted on Site 13, muttering about completion cycles and keeping the count. He handed me a brass key stamped with the year 1887, saying, "Time runs different here. Don't start any clocks you can't stop." I ignored the warning signs. How my phone kept resetting to 1887 no matter how many times I fixed it. The way the Airstream's reflection showed a bustling town instead of empty ruins. The constant ticking sound with no visible source. My cameras were acting up too, capturing images of people in Victorian clothing who vanished when I looked up from the viewfinder. The town's buildings rippled in the heat, their shadows stretching wrong against the desert floor. Each archive photo I compared showed subtle differences, buildings that changed position overnight, mine shaft entrances that appeared and disappeared, ghostly figures that moved closer in each successive image. Through my viewfinder, the town seemed alive, bustling with activity that vanished when I lowered the camera. That's when I noticed my V's brass key glowing hot, its metal surface etching itself with dates and names. The list ended with my own name, accompanied by tomorrow's date. Through my window, the ghost town's empty streets suddenly filled with flickering figures in Victorian dress, all moving in perfect 6-second loops. Then came 3 sharp knocks on my door, followed by a voice from 1887. Mr. Foster, the town council is ready for your daily report. As planned, as always, the door swung open on its own, and what stood there made my blood freeze. The doorway framed a man in an immaculate 1887 suit, but his face was a brass clockwork mechanism of spinning gears and ticking parts. Behind him, the town had transformed, streets full of similar Victorian-era automatons, all going about their business in precise mechanical loops that were set every 6 seconds. My cameras captured impossible images, the same scene photographed from identical angles hundreds of times, each dated 1887, but showing subtle changes. The townspeople's clockwork faces grew more intricate in each iteration, their movements more precise. The photos in my historical archives were changing too, updating themselves with new details from scenes I was watching unfold. The ticking sound came from everywhere now, perfectly synchronized with the automaton's movements. My research notes began changing themselves, ink appearing on pages describing events I hadn't witnessed yet. Each entry ended with the same phrase: Day 7 approaches. The count must be maintained. The chrome airstream reflected the truth, not just the mechanical town, but hundreds of overlapping versions. Through its surface, I watched myself arrive in different RVs across different decades, each time following the same script. The manager's words about completion cycles echoed in my mind as I saw other researchers, other investigators, all joining the endless clockwork dance. The brass key burned with new names and dates, each list ending with mine. But now I saw the pattern. Every list contained exactly 157 names, the same number as the original missing townspeople. The ticking grew louder as somewhere, a massive mechanism counted down to something inevitable as the clockwork man took a jerking step into my RV. Every timepiece I owned began spinning wildly. Through the windows, I watched in horror as the entire population turned to face me in perfect unison, their brass faces opening to reveal dark gears within. The clockwork citizens moved with terrifying precision, each step bringing them closer to my RV. Their brass faces reflected the setting sun, creating a hypnotic pattern of light that matched the endless ticking. Inside, the mechanical man's gears whirred as he raised a hand that was slowly transforming from flesh to metal. Trying to escape only proved the trap's design. Every road led back to Site 13, the odometer spinning, but distance meaningless. The brass key grew heavier with each attempt, gaining the weight of all its previous owners. My historical photographs kept changing, showing different versions of myself discovering this same horrible truth, each ending with a transformation into brass and gears. The airstream's reflective surface revealed the mechanical reality beneath the town's facade. Vast clockwork mechanisms turned beneath the streets, powered by some impossible energy. The mine shafts weren't dug for silver. They were access points to something much older, a device that maintained the endless cycle of conversion. Each camera image revealed another layer, ghostly figures carrying brass keys, all converging on the mine entrance at different points in time. The manager appeared in every version, his milky eyes watching each new arrival join the mechanical congregation. The ticking sound formed a pattern now, a countdown synchronized with my own heartbeat. My research notes rewrote themselves faster, pages filling with observations from past iterations. Every investigator had documented the same discovery. Dust Valley wasn't a town, but a conversion engine designed to maintain some cosmic balance. The original 157 residents were its first payment, but it needed regular tributes to keep time flowing properly. Through my windows, I watched as the clockwork crowd reached my RV, their brass hands extending keys identical to mine. The manager emerged from their midst, his human disguise falling away to reveal the master timekeeper beneath. "Your calibration begins now," they announced in mechanical unison. The clockwork beings moved with machine precision as they surrounded my RV. Their brass faces opened like flowers made of gears, each revealing a dark space that seemed to lead into the vast mechanism below the town. Through the Airstream's reflection, I watched other versions of myself reach this same moment, each making different choices that all led to the same mechanical end. My cameras captured the transformation process in perfect detail, flesh becoming brass, blood turning to oil, bones restructuring into precisely calibrated gears. The phantom lights revealed their true purpose, each converted human becoming a new component in the vast chronological engine that kept time itself ticking forward. The mine entrance pulsed with the same metallic light as my key, revealing its true nature, a calibration chamber where new parts were integrated into the mechanism. The ticking reached a fever pitch as reality began to fragment, showing layers of time like pages in a book. Each layer contained another version of Death Valley, another cycle of conversion. Other investigators' forms flickered through my RV, all in various stages of transformation. I saw their discoveries, their attempts to escape, their final moments as they joined the great machine. The manager appeared at each version's end, his role unchanged since 1887, the calibrator of souls, the keeper of the cosmic clock. Time fractured completely around me, showing the truth in strobing flashes of brass and steel. The original townspeople hadn't disappeared, they'd been converted, becoming the first components of something vast and hungry. Each new visitor added another piece, maintaining the delicate balance between tick and talk. As the manager raised the master key, I felt the first tingling sensation of brass replacing flesh. Looking down at my hands, I watched in horror as my fingertips began to shine with metallic perfection. The transformation moved through me like a wave of liquid metal, precise and methodical as clockwork. The manager added my key to his vast ring, each one representing another soul converted into chronological fuel for the eternal machine. I understand my role now, my place in the mechanism. Each day, I perform my designated movements with perfect 6-second precision, helping maintain the flow of time itself. Through the Airstream's reflection, I watch new investigators arrive, each believing they'll solve the mystery of Death Valley, each destined to add their own eternal tick to the cosmic talk. The brass key chooses carefully, marking only those whose absence won't create paradoxes in the timeline. My blog still updates with scheduled posts. My photos continue to appear online, all maintained by the machine's perfect memory. Time flows smoothly because we keep it wound with our endless dance. The count remains at 157, but the components change. When one piece wears down, the manager brings a replacement, ensuring the mechanism's continuity. The mine shaft descends to the heart of a cosmic clock that measures time far beyond human understanding. Yesterday, I watched you park your RV in Site 13. Just as I once did, through my brass eyes, I saw the key mark you, adding your name to its surface. The manager is preparing your place in the mechanism. After all, time must flow, the count must be maintained, and the clock must never, ever stop. Even now, I hear your door opening to the sound of 3 perfect knocks.